And what you're talking about with epigenetics is that we have the power through what we choose to focus on, what we choose, how we choose to work with our thoughts to influence our happiness.
Yeah, that's the premise of the book. The book starts off with segregating the different classes of happiness. You know, happiness means different things to different people, just like the word love does. But what is happiness? The common definition of happiness is basically acquiring material things and having some pleasures, various pleasures that we have, and a feeling of satisfaction and everything in between. But all of these types of things are dependent upon external circumstances or conditions. So a pleasure today could be a pain tomorrow. So the kind of happiness that we're talking about has no external conditions. It's a spiritual type of happiness. And basically, it's the type of happiness we receive when you do an act of goodwill. If you do a good deed or you do an act of compassion, you feel good. And you feel good every time you do it, and it has nothing to do with external circumstances. So since that's true in all cultures and all times, we believe that it's genetic, that we have happiness genes. In doing these spiritual acts, you receive positive influences from that. Now, so that's the situation, and I think it's self-evident because everybody has these sensations. The problem we have is, of course, as you mentioned before, is that we have other genes, and there's a gene hierarchy. There's a priority of genes. And the first priority, genetically speaking, is that the genes that go with survival.
Right.
And those are the competitive genes. And, of course, at the initial time of predecessors, they were absolutely essential to survive, but we still have those genes today. Some people might refer to them as something like caveman genes. Those are the genes that make us competitive for possessions. Those are the genes that cause violence. Those are the genes that cause wars. And basically, those are the kind of genes that cause the mess that the world's in today.
And so what we're talking about actually is, in essence, I guess turning those kinds of genes off by what we take in, but also turning on the kind of genes that would make someone kinder, more compassionate, more understanding.
Exactly. So our premise is that the happiness genes are on. And the reason we say they're on to all people at all times, because they're self-evident. All you have to do is do a good deed, and you immediately get emotionally rewarded. That's always the case. Now, the problem is that the caveman, if I can use that word, caveman type of genes have a higher priority than the happiness genes, which means that when they're in operation, they block the expression of the happiness genes. So what we want to do is, by epigenetics, we want to turn down or turn off those types of genetics that interfere with the happiness genes.
Now, I remember Bruce Lipton in his book, he was talking about this, and I know he wrote the foreword for your book, and he, of course, is a cell biologist speaking about epigenetics. He talks about this in terms of fear and then growth. Growth is the stimuli that is positive, and actually on a physiological level, this actually is attracts things to it. In other words, it stimulates, versus the defensive sort of, on a cell biology level, the cells actually protect themselves, I guess is the way to say it. And that, again, goes back to a sort of survival instinct. Is that what we're talking about?
I think we are. Yeah, so he gets involved in the mechanism of the biology and so forth, which we really don't get that involved in the book. We didn't want to make it too technical because this book is meant to help people.
Well, that's what I love about the book, actually. I wanted to make a note of that, is that, you know, I've read Bruce's books, several of them, and they're highly technical, and I happen to like that stuff. I mean, I'm trying to explain it back to you because I think it's really interesting. The idea that there's these proteins and that the DNA have a sheath and that it gets desheathed, and all of that has been really fascinating for me to learn about. That's part of why I wanted to have you on the show. But what I love specifically about your book, and it's really, it's a remarkable book because what you're saying is true. You're not making it so complicated that, you know, it's so hard to understand that we can't take practical things from it. And more importantly, you actually give a guide so that there's things we can actually do to, as we put it before, turn on the happiness genes.
Right.
It's a 28-day program, actually, a process that's kind of outlined in the book to help people take a concept that can be a little ethereal, can be a little out there, a little hard to understand, and make it practical. So I want to commend you for that, because it is so hard to take these concepts and make them practical.